How did repainting my late father's Ford pink lead to my daughter losing her car, her allowance, and her safety net in less than 24 hours? Why did staying calm for one night matter more than any argument I could have started in that garage? This is how I stopped being a father she could use and became the consequence she didn't expect. The airport parking lot stretched endlessly under harsh fluorescent lights as I wheeled my carry-on toward the rental car return. 3 days in Chicago had felt like 3 weeks. Back-to-back client meetings, delayed flights, and the kind of business travel that makes you appreciate your own bed. All I wanted was to get home, check on the Ford in the garage, and maybe spend Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and the newspaper like a normal human being. The drive home took 40 minutes through familiar suburban streets. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 8 years now, ever since Aria graduated high school, and I finally had enough saved for a house with a proper garage. The Ford deserved better than street parking and weather exposure. My father had bought that car new in 1987, a midnight blue Ford Mustang that he'd driven exactly twice a week, to church on Sunday and to the hardware store on Saturday morning. When he passed 4 years ago, I inherited more than just a car. I inherited a responsibility. I'd spent countless weekends restoring every inch of that vehicle. New upholstery that matched the original specifications exactly. Engine work that brought the V8 back to factory performance. Paint correction that made the midnight blue finish look like liquid glass. It wasn't about the money, though I'd invested thousands. It was about preserving something my father had cared for, something that connected us across the years we'd worked together in his garage, learning that tools had their place and respect had its price. Pulling into my driveway, I noticed Aria's Honda wasn't there, probably out with Caleb again, spending money she didn't earn on entertainment she couldn't afford. At 22, she'd mastered the art of being an adult everywhere, except where it counted. Responsibility, consequences, and basic respect for other people's property. I parked the rental in the driveway and grabbed my bags, already mentally planning the week ahead. Monday's client calls, Tuesday's site visit, and somewhere in between, maybe an hour in the garage with the Ford. Just me, the car, and the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from maintaining something beautiful. The garage door opener hummed as I pressed the button, and fluorescent lights flickered to life across the concrete floor. What I saw stopped me cold. My father's midnight blue Ford Mustang, the car I'd restored bolt by bolt, the vehicle I'd spent 4 years bringing back to showroom condition, was painted pink. Not professionally painted, not even competently painted. Cheap, hardware store pink, with visible brush strokes, paint drips frozen mid-fall down the doors, and overspray on the windows where someone hadn't bothered with masking tape. I set my bags down slowly and walked around the car. The pink was everywhere: hood, trunk, doors, even the bumpers. Whoever had done this had worked fast and careless, the kind of job that screamed contempt rather than creativity. Paint pooled in the door handles, drip marks ran down the quarter panels like pink tears. The chrome had been painted over without any attempt at protection. This wasn't a prank. This was destruction. I stood there in the garage, surrounded by the tools I'd used to restore this car, looking at years of careful work obliterated by someone who couldn't be bothered to paint her own Honda. Because that was the thing that cut deepest. Aria owned a perfectly good car, a car she could have painted any color she wanted, a car that belonged to her, but she'd chosen mine instead. The side door from the garage into the kitchen opened behind me. "Oh, you're back!" Aria's voice carried that particular tone she used when she knew she'd crossed a line, but wanted to frame it as harmless fun. "Do you like it?" I thought the blue was getting boring. I turned around slowly. She stood in the doorway wearing paint-stained clothes and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her, I could see Caleb lurking in the kitchen, probably ready to back up whatever story she'd prepared. "You painted my car," I said quietly. "I gave it some personality. Come on, don't be mad. It's just paint. You can always change it back." She laughed, but it sounded forced. Besides, pink is totally in right now. I saw this influencer who... Why didn't you paint your own car? The question hung in the air between us. She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What? Your Honda is sitting in the driveway. If you wanted a pink car, why didn't you paint your own car? Well, I mean... She gestured vaguely at the Ford. This one's bigger, it photographs better, and it's not like you drive it that much anyway. I nodded slowly, understanding something fundamental that had been building for years, but never crystallized until this moment. She didn't see this as my car. She saw it as a resource available for her use, like everything else I'd provided. The house she lived in rent-free, the credit card I paid, the insurance, the phone bill, the groceries, the gas money, all of it just resources that existed for her convenience. The difference between a prank and contempt isn't the action itself. It's whether the person considers your feelings at all. A prank assumes you'll eventually laugh together. Contempt assumes your feelings don't matter. I looked at my father's car one more time, seeing the careful restoration work buried under careless pink paint. Remembering Saturday mornings when I was 12, handing him tools while he explained the difference between doing something right and doing something fast. Thinking about the hours I'd spent matching the original paint color exactly, researching factory specifications, taking pride in preserving something beautiful. Well, Arya prompted. Aren't you going to say anything? I walked over to the wall switch and turned off the garage lights. The fluorescent tubes flickered once and went dark, leaving us in shadow. I'm going to bed, I said, and walked past her into the house. Behind me, I heard Caleb whisper, Dude, I think he's actually upset. He'll get over it, Arya replied. He always does. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about how we'd gotten here. Because this didn't happen overnight. You don't wake up one morning and decide to destroy something your father spent years restoring. This was the culmination of something I'd been enabling for a long time. When Isla left 8 years ago, she took her suitcases and her guilt, but she left Arya behind. Arya was 14 then, confused and angry and looking for someone to blame. The easiest target was the man who wasn't her biological father but had raised her anyway, me. I understood her anger. I even accepted it as part of the grieving process. What I didn't understand then was that I was teaching her that disrespecting me had no consequences. I'd made the conscious decision to stay after Isla left. Arya wasn't my biological daughter, but she'd been my daughter in every way that mattered since she was 6 years old. I'd taught her to ride a bike, attended every school play, helped with homework, and been there for every scraped knee and broken heart. When Isla walked out, I could have walked out too. Legally, I had no obligation to an ex-wife's daughter from a previous relationship, but I stayed. Because love isn't about biology. It's about commitment, and I was committed to seeing Arya become a good person. The problem was, I'd confused being understanding with having no boundaries. In the kitchen the next morning, I made coffee and thought about the progression. At 15, Arya had started testing limits with small rebellions, staying out past curfew, forgetting to do chores, rolling her eyes when I asked about homework. Normal teenage stuff, I told myself. She's processing her mother's abandonment. By 16, the disrespect had become public. She'd contradict me in front of her friends, make jokes about my rules, and treat my authority as a suggestion rather than a boundary. When I'd try to address it, she'd invoke her mother's departure. You're not even my real dad anyway. It was a weapon she learned to use expertly, and I never learned to disarm it. I should have understood then that she was testing whether I'd leave too. Instead, I absorbed the disrespect to prove I wouldn't abandon her. Every time I failed to enforce a consequence, I was teaching her that my boundaries were negotiable. The teenage years blended into early adulthood with the same pattern. sarcasm instead of respect, demands instead of requests, the assumption that my resources, my house, my money, my time, existed for her convenience. When she turned 18 and I suggested she get a job, she laughed and asked why she'd need one when I paid for everything anyway. When she turned 21 and I mentioned moving out, she pointed out that she was saving me from loneliness. Besides, she'd said, where else would I go? Mom's not exactly rolling out the welcome mat. She was right about Isla. Her mother had built a new life in Arizona with a new husband and wanted nothing to do with the complications of her previous choices. Aria had learned early that she could use her abandonment issues as leverage against anyone who cared about her. The more you loved her, the more power she had to manipulate that love. Caleb had entered the picture 2 years ago and everything got worse. He was 24, unemployed, and had perfected the art of living off other people's generosity while calling it finding himself. Together, he and Aria had formed a partnership of entitlement that treated my house like their personal resort and my wallet like their emergency fund. The disrespect had escalated gradually. Eye-rolling became open contradiction. Contradiction became mockery. Mockery became contempt. And I'd absorbed it all, telling myself I was being patient, understanding, loving. What I was actually being was weak. The pink paint wasn't rebellion. It was the natural evolution of years of unchecked contempt. She'd tested every other boundary and found them all negotiable. Why wouldn't she assume my car was just another resource available for her entertainment? I poured another cup of coffee and admitted something I'd been avoiding for years. Aria didn't respect me because I'd never required respect. She didn't value my boundaries because I'd never enforced them. She treated my property as her own because I'd never taught her the difference. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my thoughts. Aria appeared in the kitchen, wearing yesterday's paint-stained clothes and the kind of smile people use when they're pretending everything is fine. "Morning," she said brightly. "Coffee smells good?" I handed her a cup without comment. "So," she continued, settling into the chair across from me, "about the car. I know you were probably shocked last night, but once you get used to it, I think you'll really like the pink. It's bold. It makes a statement." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. And like I said, if you really hate it, we can always paint it back. Though honestly, I think this is way more interesting than boring old blue. She laughed, but it sounded nervous. "Come on, don't be such a grump about it. It's not that deep." It's not that deep. 4 words that summarized everything wrong with our relationship. To her, destroying years of my work wasn't deep. Disrespecting something I'd inherited from my father wasn't deep. The hundreds of hours I'd spent restoring that car, the thousands of dollars I'd invested, the sentimental value of preserving my father's memory, none of it was deep enough to matter. I finished my coffee and stood up. "I have some errands to run today." "Cool. Can you drop me off at the mall? Caleb's meeting me there later." "Take your own car." "It's making that weird noise again. I think it needs to go to the shop." Of course it did. Because maintaining her own vehicle was my responsibility too, apparently. "Then call an Uber." She blinked, surprised. I'd never refused a ride before. "Seriously? It's like 15 minutes out of your way." I said I have errands to run. I left her sitting at the kitchen table looking confused. As I grabbed my keys from the counter, I could hear Caleb's footsteps coming down the stairs. Perfect timing. He'd be able to reassure her that I was just being dramatic and would get over it soon. But as I walked out to my rental car, I realized something had shifted overnight. I wasn't angry about the Ford anymore. Anger would have been giving Aria exactly what she expected. Drama she could manipulate, emotions she could leverage, attention she could redirect. Instead, I felt something much more dangerous: clarity. I spent that Saturday morning driving around town, not because I had errands, but because I needed space to think without Aria's voice in my head, telling me how I should feel about my own property. The rental car felt anonymous and temporary, which matched my mood perfectly. Everything I'd built, the house, the relationship, the careful balance of supporting Arya while hoping she'd eventually mature, suddenly felt as temporary as this borrowed vehicle. By noon, I found myself parked outside the bank where I'd done business for 12 years. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the building and understanding that I was at a crossroads. I could go home, pretend the pink paint was just a phase, and continue the same pattern that had brought us to this moment. Or I could walk into that bank and start treating this situation like the business problem it had become. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. And I'd been enabling Arya's disrespect for so long that she'd forgotten I had any other options. The bank manager, Mrs. Veller, had handled my accounts since I'd moved to town. She was professional, efficient, and didn't ask unnecessary questions when I requested printouts of all automatic transfers, standing payments, and account activity related to Arya's expenses. The numbers told a story I'd been avoiding: 8 years of car payments, insurance premiums, credit card bills, phone plans, medical expenses, and cash transfers that totaled more than most people's annual salary. I'd been funding an adult's lifestyle while being treated like an ATM with emotions. "Will you be making any changes to these automatic payments?" Mrs. Veller asked. "Not today, but I'll be back Monday morning." Next stop was my insurance agent's office. I'd added Arya to my auto policy when she turned 16, and she'd remained there even after getting her own car. Her driving record included 2 minor accidents and 3 speeding tickets, all of which I'd paid without requiring her to contribute. The agent pulled up her file and confirmed what I already knew. I was the policyholder, which meant I had complete control over her coverage. "Thinking about making some changes?" he asked. "Possibly. What's the process for removing someone from the policy?" "Just need written notice. Takes effect immediately." I nodded and filed that information away. The final stop was the DMV website, accessed from my phone in the parking lot. The Ford's title was in my name alone. I'd inherited it directly from my father's estate. Arya had no legal claim to the vehicle, which meant her pink paint job was legally vandalism of my property. I'd never considered pressing charges because she was family, but family status didn't change the legal facts. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: control. Not the illusion of control that comes from hoping other people will make better choices, but actual control over my own resources and decisions. Arya had spent so long treating my boundaries as suggestions that she'd forgotten I could enforce them unilaterally. That evening, she tried to engage me in conversation about the car again. "I was thinking," she said over dinner, "maybe we could compromise. What if we painted some blue flames on the pink, like a sunset theme?" I looked at her across the table, this young woman I'd raised, supported, and loved despite years of increasing disrespect, and realized she still didn't understand what had happened. She thought this was a negotiation about paint colors. She had no idea it was an evaluation of our entire relationship. "That's an idea," I said neutrally. She brightened, probably interpreting my non-rejection as acceptance. "Great. Caleb knows someone who does custom paint work. It wouldn't cost much." Of course Caleb knew someone, and of course she assumed I'd pay for it. That night, I sat in my home office with a folder full of bank statements, insurance documents, and maintenance records. The Ford's restoration had cost $12,000 over 4 years, not including my labor. The pink paint had probably cost $30 and destroyed thousands in value. But the money wasn't really the point. The point was that Arya had looked at something I treasured and decided her entertainment was more important than my feelings. She'd taken something that connected me to my father and turned it into a prop for whatever social media nonsense had inspired her. And when confronted with what she'd done, her response was to minimize my feelings and suggest I was overreacting. It's not that deep. I opened my laptop and began typing a list, automatic payments to cancel, car insurance, Aria's coverage, cell phone plan, her line, credit card, authorized user status, Netflix, Spotify, and streaming services, shared accounts, property to secure, Ford Mustang, consider sale, house keys, change locks if necessary, garage access, reprogram opener, legal considerations, 30-day notice for residency termination, documentation of property damage, transfer of financial responsibilities. It wasn't a list made in anger. Anger would have been reactive, emotional, and ultimately ineffective. This was a business plan for ending a business relationship that had been disguised as family love. I'd spent 8 years being a father to someone who saw me as a resource. It was time to stop being available for that role. My phone buzzed with a text from Aria. "Thanks for being cool about the car thing. I know change is hard, but you'll love it eventually." I stared at the message for a long time. Even now, she was telling me how I should feel about my own property. The pink heart emoji felt like mockery, a little girl's attempt to smooth over adult consequences with childish charm. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my calendar and scheduled appointments for Monday morning: bank, insurance office, and a consultation with a family attorney about the legal requirements for asking an adult child to move out. By Tuesday, I'd have all the information I needed to make informed decisions about my own life. For the first time in years, I slept soundly. Sunday morning brought the kind of autumn weather that makes you want to spend the day in the garage with a project car and a cup of coffee. Instead, I spent it planning Aria's 23rd birthday celebration, which was scheduled for the following weekend. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was planning a party for someone who'd just destroyed my most treasured possession, and she had no idea anything had changed. That was intentional. Over the years, I'd learned that Aria thrived on drama and emotional reactions. Every boundary I'd tried to set had been met with tears, accusations, or manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for having expectations. She'd weaponized my love for her so effectively that I'd stopped trying to enforce consequences because the emotional cost was too high. But what if I stopped providing the drama she expected? Monday morning, I executed the plan I'd developed over the weekend. First stop, the bank, where I canceled all automatic payments related to Aria's expenses. Mrs. Velour processed the changes without comment, though she did mention that the canceled payments would take effect immediately. "The account holders will be notified of any declined transactions," she said. "I understand." Next, the insurance office, where I removed Aria from my auto policy. The agent explained that she'd need to secure her own coverage immediately or risk driving uninsured. "Will you be calling her to explain the change?" he asked. "She'll figure it out." Final stop: a consultation with a family attorney about the legal process for asking an adult child to leave the family home. The lawyer was straightforward about my rights and obligations. Since she's not paying rent and has no lease agreement, she's considered a guest in your home. You can ask her to leave with 30 days written notice. If she refuses, you can pursue formal eviction, but that's rarely necessary in family situations. What about property damage? If you have documentation and proof of value, you could pursue civil remedies. But again, family situations are complicated. I nodded, understanding that the legal system would give me tools I'd never use. The threat of consequences was often more effective than the consequences themselves. That evening, Aria discovered the first canceled payment when her credit card was declined at dinner with Caleb. She called me from the restaurant, confused and slightly panicked. "Dad, something's wrong with the credit card. It says the account is closed. I canceled it this morning." Silence. Then, "What? Why?" "I'm making some changes to my financial arrangements." "But I need this card. What am I supposed to do?" "Use your own money." Another silence. "I don't have any money. You know that." "Then I guess you'll need to get some." I hung up before she could respond. Within 10 minutes, she was home, storming into the living room where I was reading the newspaper. "We need to talk," she announced. I looked up from the sports section. "About what?" "About you canceling my credit card without warning, about you acting weird all week, about whatever this is." She gestured vaguely as if my behavior was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "I'm not acting weird. I'm making decisions about my own finances." "But you always pay for my stuff." "That's how it works." That's how it works. As if our relationship was a business arrangement where I provided resources and she provided, what exactly? The privilege of her presence? "Things change," I said, returning to my newspaper. "This is about the car, isn't it?" Her voice took on the wheedling tone she used when she wanted to manipulate me into feeling guilty. "Look, I said I was sorry. I said we could paint it back. What more do you want?" I folded the newspaper and looked at her directly. "When did you say you were sorry?" She blinked. Well, I mean, I implied it. When I said we could fix it." "You never apologized, Arya. You told me I'd get used to it." "Same thing." "No, it's not." We stared at each other across the living room, and I could see her recalibrating her approach. The guilt trip wasn't working, so she'd try something else. "Fine. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I painted your car. I'm sorry I didn't ask permission. I'm sorry you're upset about it." Each word sounded forced, like she was reading from a script. "There. Now can you turn my credit card back on?" "No." "What do you mean, no? I apologized." "An apology doesn't undo damage, Arya. It doesn't restore the car or change the fact that you destroyed something I spent years working on. It's just a car. It was my father's car. It was the car I restored in his memory. It was something that mattered to me, and you destroyed it for a photo opportunity." She was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe, finally, she was beginning to understand the scope of what she'd done. Then she said, "Well, it's not like Grandpa Owen is ever going to see it. He's been gone for a long time." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. This was the person I'd raised, supported, and loved unconditionally for 8 years. This was how she talked about my father's memory. "Go to your room," I said quietly. "I'm 22 years old. You can't send me to my room." "You're right. You're an adult, which means you can find somewhere else to live." Her face went white. "You don't mean that. 30 days, Arya. Find somewhere else to live." I left her standing in the living room and went to bed. Through the thin walls, I could hear her on the phone with Caleb, crying and raging about how unfair I was being, how I was punishing her for one little mistake, how she didn't understand why I was being so dramatic. Even now, she was the victim in her own story. The next morning, she tried a different approach. Sweetness instead of confrontation. She made me coffee and toast, cleaned the kitchen without being asked, and generally acted like the daughter I'd always hoped she could be. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she began carefully. "About the car meaning something to you because of Grandpa Owen. I didn't really understand that before." I sipped my coffee and waited. "So I was thinking, maybe for my birthday this weekend, instead of going out to dinner, we could work on the car together. You could teach me how to do the bodywork properly, and we could restore it the right way." It was a good manipulation, appealing to my desire for connection, offering to learn something I valued, framing destruction as an opportunity for bonding. A year ago, it might have worked. "That's a nice thought," I said, "but I've already made dinner reservations for Saturday." She brightened. "Oh, good. I was hoping you weren't really serious about the 30-day thing." "I'm serious about the 30 days, but I'm not serious about ruining your birthday." The confusion on her face was almost comical. She couldn't understand how I could be kicking her out while still planning to celebrate her birthday. In her mind, love was binary. Either I was angry and punishing her, or I was forgiving and enabling her. The possibility that I could love her while still enforcing consequences was outside her experience. Saturday night arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I'd made reservations at Aria's favorite restaurant, invited Caleb, and even bought her a present. A small used Honda Civic in good condition. Not expensive, but reliable and entirely hers. She squealed when she saw it in the restaurant parking lot, hugged me tighter than she had in years, and spent dinner talking about all the places she'd drive and all the freedom it would give her. Caleb praised me for being so cool about everything, and other diners probably saw us as a happy family celebrating a milestone. What they couldn't see was that I'd kept the spare keys. "This is amazing, Dad. Thank you so much," Aria gushed over dessert. "I can't believe I was worried about the credit card thing. You were just making room in the budget for this, weren't you?" I smiled and said nothing. "And I'm sorry I overreacted about the moving out thing. I know you didn't mean it. You were just upset about the car, and I get it now. Really." "Do you?" "Totally. And I promise no more surprises with your stuff. From now on, I'll ask before I borrow anything." Borrow. She still thought painting my car was borrowing it. After dinner, we stood in the parking lot admiring her new Honda. She took selfies with it, posted them to social media, and talked about all the modifications she wanted to make. Paint, rims, maybe a sound system. "You should drive it home," I suggested. "Are you sure? We could ride together." "I think I'll walk. It's a nice night." She hugged me again, got in the Honda with Caleb, and drove away, leaving me standing alone under the streetlights. The walk home took 45 minutes through quiet neighborhoods where other families were probably dealing with their own complications behind lit windows. By the time I reached my house, I'd made the final decision I'd been avoiding all week. That Sunday night, I sat in my home office with 8 years of financial records spread across the desk like evidence in a trial. Bank statements, credit card bills, insurance payments, car maintenance receipts, medical expenses, and cash transfers that painted a clear picture of economic dependency disguised as family love. The numbers were staggering when viewed all at once. Over $180,000 in direct support since Aria turned 18. That didn't include housing, utilities, groceries, or the countless small expenses I'd absorbed without thinking. If I'd been paying a stranger's living expenses at this rate, people would have called it financial abuse of me. But the money wasn't really the issue. The issue was what I'd bought with that money. The right to be disrespected in my own home by someone who saw my generosity as weakness and my boundaries as suggestions. I opened my laptop and began the process I'd been postponing for a week. First, I canceled the remaining automatic payments I'd missed during Monday's bank visit. Streaming services, subscription boxes, gym membership, car maintenance plan, all the small monthly charges that added up to a lifestyle Aria couldn't afford on her own. Next, I called my insurance company's 24-hour service line and removed Aria from my homeowner's policy as an additional insured. She'd never asked to be added, probably never knew she was covered, but that coverage had been protecting her from liability for exactly the kind of property damage she'd just committed. The hardest call was to my phone company, canceling the family plan that had connected us for 6 years. Aria's number would be disconnected within 72 hours unless she established her own account. It felt symbolic, cutting the electronic umbilical cord that had kept her tethered to my resources. By midnight, I'd systematically removed Aria from every financial system that had supported her adult life. She'd wake up tomorrow to a world where her lifestyle required her own money, her own credit, her own responsibility. For the first time since she'd turned 18, the cost of her choices would be borne entirely by her. I should have felt guilty. A year ago, I would have felt guilty. Instead, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: peace. The constant low-level anxiety of wondering what Aria would do next, what boundaries she'd test, what expense she'd create, all of it was gone. I'd spent so long being afraid of her reactions that I'd forgotten how good it felt to make decisions based on my own values instead of her emotional volatility. The pink Ford sat in the garage like a monument to my own enabling. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded of how completely I'd failed to teach Arya that other people's feelings mattered, that respect wasn't optional, that actions had consequences beyond her immediate entertainment. I'd been so focused on being the father she could count on that I'd forgotten to be the father she could respect. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray October sky that makes everything look serious and inevitable. I called in sick to work, the first time I'd used a personal day for personal business in 3 years, and drove to the used car dealership where I'd bought Arya's Honda. The sales manager, Rick, remembered me from Saturday's transaction. "How's your daughter liking the car?" "She loves it, but I'm here about something else today." I handed him the Ford's title and keys. "I need to sell this one." Rick walked out to the parking lot with me to inspect the car. The pink paint looked even worse in daylight. Amateur, careless, destructive. He circled the vehicle slowly, taking notes on a clipboard. "It's a nice car under all that paint," he said diplomatically. "But the custom work is going to hurt the value significantly. Most buyers won't want pink, and stripping it back to the original color is expensive." "How much?" He did some calculations, consulted his phone for market comparisons, and gave me a number that was about 60% of what the car had been worth in midnight blue. The pink paint had cost me thousands in value, just as I'd expected. "I'll take it." "You sure? You might get more from a private sale if you're willing to wait." "I'm sure." We went inside to handle the paperwork. As I signed the title transfer, Rick made conversation about the car's history. "Looks like you put a lot of work into this one. Original restoration?" "I restored it with my father. He bought it new in 1987. "That's tough, having to sell something with that kind of sentimental value." I signed my name on the final document and pushed it across the desk. Sometimes keeping something costs more than it's worth. The drive home in my rental car felt like closing a chapter I'd been trying to finish for years. The Ford was gone, along with the daily reminder of my failure to set boundaries. Arya would discover its absence eventually, but by then it would be too late to manipulate me into reversing the decision. That afternoon, she called from Caleb's apartment, where she'd been spending most of her time since I'd given her 30 days' notice. "Dad, something weird is happening. My phone is saying the service will be disconnected tomorrow, and Netflix isn't working, and I tried to use the credit card at the grocery store and it was declined again." "I canceled those services." "All of them?" "All of them." Silence. Then, "Why are you doing this? I said I was sorry about the car." "This isn't about the car anymore, Arya." "Then what's it about?" I looked out my kitchen window at the garage where the Ford had sat for 4 years, where I'd spent countless hours preserving something beautiful, where my father's memory had lived in chrome and steel until someone who claimed to love me decided her entertainment mattered more. "It's about respect," I said, "and it's about consequences. And it's about the difference between being your father and being your bank account." "I don't understand." "I know you don't. That's the problem. Can we talk about this? Can I come over? You have 23 days to find somewhere else to live. After that, we can talk about rebuilding a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency." "You're really going to kick me out? Your own daughter?" "You're not my daughter, Arya. You've made that very clear over the years. I'm just the man who pays your bills." I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, enjoying the kind of quiet that comes from finally stopping a pattern that should have ended years ago. My phone rang twice, Arya calling back, but I didn't answer. Whatever she had to say could wait until she was ready to have a conversation about respect instead of a negotiation about resources. For the first time in 8 years, I went to bed without worrying about what Arya would do next. Because whatever she did, it would be with her own money, in her own space, facing her own consequences. I'd finally stopped being a father she could use and started being a man she might eventually learn to respect. Tuesday morning brought the kind of clarity that only comes after you've stopped pretending a situation will fix itself. I woke up early, made coffee in a kitchen that felt different somehow, quieter, more mine, and prepared for what I knew would be the hardest conversation of this entire process. Aria had been calling since Monday evening, leaving voicemails that progressed from confusion to anger to desperation. I'd listened to each one, hearing the evolution of someone who was finally understanding that manipulation had limits and consequences were real. The final voicemail, left at 2:17 a.m., was different from the others. "Dad, I know you're mad, but this isn't fair. I can't afford my own phone plan and insurance and everything else. I don't even have a job. You can't just cut me off like this. Call me back, please." For the first time in years, she'd said please. I finished my coffee, grabbed the folder of sale documents from the Ford transaction, and drove to the dealership to complete the final paperwork. Rick had the check ready, $8,400 for a car that had been worth $14,000 before someone decided pink paint was more important than respect. "You sure about this?" he asked one more time. "Family situations can be complicated. Sometimes people work things out." "Some situations can't be worked out," I replied, signing the final document. "Sometimes they can only be ended." The check went directly into my personal account, separate from any funds Aria had ever accessed. It felt symbolic, converting years of careful restoration work into cash that would never be available for her use. My phone rang as I was leaving the dealership. Aria's number. "Dad, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Listen, I think there's been some kind of mistake with the bank or something. All my cards are canceled, my phone is getting shut off, and Caleb says you won't even talk to him when he calls." "There's no mistake. But I need those things. I need my phone and my credit card and my insurance. How am I supposed to function without them?" "The same way every other adult functions, with your own money and your own resources." "I don't have any money, you know that." "Then get some." "How?" "I don't have a job, I don't have references, I don't even have a way to get to interviews without a car." "You have a car. I bought it for you Saturday night." "That's not... yes, but I need gas money and insurance money and..." Her voice trailed off as she realized what she was asking for. "You need me to fund your independence." "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that, Aria. You want to be an adult when it comes to making decisions about other people's property, but you want to be a child when it comes to paying for the consequences." I could hear her crying now, but it sounded different from her usual manipulative tears. This sounded like genuine distress, the kind that comes from finally understanding that your safety net has been removed. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to figure it out, like every other 23-year-old in the world." "But I'm not like every other 23-year-old. I'm your daughter." "No, Aria. You're the person who painted my father's car pink and told me it wasn't that deep. You're the person who's lived in my house for 5 years without paying rent, used my credit cards without contributing to the payments, and treated my boundaries like suggestions. You're the person who's never apologized for any of it because you've never believed you needed to." Silence. Then, quietly, "I apologized about the car." "You apologized for getting caught. You apologized because I canceled your credit card. You didn't apologize because you understood what you'd done wrong." I did understand. I do understand." "Do you? Then explain it to me." Another silence. I could hear her thinking, searching for the words that would unlock my wallet and restore her access to the life I'd been funding. "I hurt your feelings," she said finally. "I damaged something that was important to you. Keep going. I took something that wasn't mine and I changed it without asking." "What else?" "I don't know what else you want me to say." "I want you to say that you understand why respect matters. I want you to say that you understand why boundaries exist. I want you to say that you understand the difference between being loved and being enabled. I don't understand the difference. To me, they're the same thing. And there it was. The core of our problem, stated with perfect honesty. In Arya's mind, love meant unlimited access to resources without accountability. Boundaries were restrictions on love. Consequences were punishments for being human. Then you need to learn the difference, I said quietly. And you need to learn it somewhere else. Dad, please, I'm scared. I don't know how to do this by myself. For the first time in our conversation, she sounded genuinely vulnerable instead of manipulative. Part of me, the part that had raised her, protected her, and absorbed years of disrespect to prove I wouldn't abandon her, wanted to fix this immediately, wanted to restore her credit cards and phone service and tell her we could work everything out. But that part of me was exactly what had created this problem. Being scared is normal, Arya. It means you're finally taking this seriously. So you'll help me? I'll help you by not helping you. I'll help you by letting you discover that you're more capable than you think you are. I'll help you by forcing you to develop the skills every adult needs. That's not helping. That's abandoning me. No, Arya. Abandoning you would have been leaving when your mother did. Abandoning you would have been walking away when you turned 18. Abandoning you would have been giving up after the first time you told me I wasn't your real father. I took a breath, looking out at the dealership parking lot where other people were making their own difficult decisions about transportation, money, and responsibility. What I'm doing now is refusing to abandon myself. I'm refusing to let you treat me like an ATM with emotions. I'm refusing to enable behavior that's turning you into someone I don't recognize and don't respect. You don't respect me? How can I respect someone who doesn't respect me? How can I respect someone who destroys my property and tells me I'm overreacting? How can I respect someone who's 23 years old and has never paid for her own phone service? She was crying harder now, but I continued. I love you, Arya. I've loved you since you were 6 years old, and I'll love you when you're 60. But love without respect isn't sustainable, and respect without consequences isn't possible. So what happens now? Now you have 21 days to find somewhere else to live. You have your own car, your own life to figure out, and your own choices to make. When you're ready to have a relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency, call me. And if I'm not ready, then I guess you'll find out what it's like to be an adult without a safety net. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time, watching people go about their Tuesday afternoon business, buying cars, trading in old ones, making the kind of practical decisions that adults make when they can't call someone else to solve their problems. My phone didn't ring again. That evening, I changed the locks on my house and reprogrammed the garage door opener. Not because I was afraid of Arya, but because boundaries require enforcement, and enforcement requires commitment. The garage looked strange without the Ford, but it didn't look empty. It looked ready for whatever came next. For the first time in 8 years, I fell asleep without my phone on the nightstand, without wondering what crisis would require my financial intervention tomorrow, without the low-level anxiety that comes from loving someone who mistakes your care for weakness. I'd finally learned the difference between being a father and being a bank account. And surprisingly, being a father felt much better.